SBC Media.
Welcome to iGaming Daily, analysing the news from the betting and gaming industry all over the globe. Supported by SBC Summit Barcelona, the industry-leading conference bringing you the future of sports betting and iGaming.
SBC Summit Barcelona is where you can experience the global industry coverage under one roof. Expect an industry-leading conference agenda covering all verticals across 7 stages, a huge trade show floor filled with over 3,000 exhibitors, and luxury networking events at premium venues in one of Europe's coolest cities. Join 10,000 executives this September at the event drawing the industry's eyes. Get your tickets now at sbcevents.com.
Germany's Fourth Interstate market has celebrated its second birthday since it was forced into existence in July 2021, ending a 12-year deliberation on how Germany would apply its online gambling laws federally across its 16 sovereign Bundeslander. On the ground, 2023 was marked as a year of transition as the newly formed GGL, the Federal Authority for Gambling, would take charge of governing the much-maligned interstate regime. 6 months on, the GGL is yet to present any plans to reform the interstate market laws or to remove any commercial restrictions frustrating licensees and stakeholders. Last week, the GGL presented its first market report on the interstate regime, citing growth and new license take-up, yet its incumbents remain unconvinced of any subsequent progress. I'm Martyn Elliott, and joining me today on iGaming Daily are Ted Menmuir, Content Director for SBC, and Ted Orme-Claye, Senior Business Journalist at SBC News and Lottery Daily. How are you doing, Ted?
Guten Tag, Martin. Ready to hit you up with some German knowledge.
Excellent. That's what we like to hear. And what about you, other Ted?
Wunderbar, Martin. Yeah, spot on, mate. Thank you. Yeah, pleasure to be here.
Excellent. Okay, so it's an interesting topic this today. Germany, as the biggest population of any country entirely in Europe, it should be a really exciting market for the industry. Yet that isn't really how it's played out in the over the last few years. So, Ted, perhaps you could start by just giving us an overview on why it's been such a problem market for the industry.
Okay, well, Martin, you're exactly right. Look, Germany is I'd say it's the problem child of European gambling regulation, and in itself, you have to understand the processes of how Germany applies laws federally and how long it can take. And also kind of the vested interest of each Bundeslander in applying a law or settling consensus on how laws should be applied federally in terms of gambling. So, as you mentioned in your intro, it was a 12-year deliberation, and Germany had pretty much a year window to kind of fit it in 2021. It got there. No one was pleased with the final results. A lot of stakeholders thought that there'd be an immediate intervention by the government, which never happened. And with the Fourth Interstate regime, we have what we got, which is a high tax market with a lot of gambling restrictions, deposit limits on players wagering on casino, and there's going to be an up and coming review of the advertising rules for federal Germany. So there is a lot going on in the market, but it is stunted by restrictions. Okay,
and Ted OC, I know you've been covering some of the developments in this market alongside Ted as well. And what's your sort of overview of it? Is anyone happy with the current position?
Yeah, as you say, I've been covering this quite closely with Ted. I'd say Ted is probably more of the voice of expertise on this one, but I'm sure I can have a crack at it. Is anyone happy? Difficult question. I mean, obviously, there's so many different stakeholders in Germany to go through. If you just look if you look at the politicians to start with, Some of them have been calling for more restrictions to come into place, particularly some at the federal level have been, but I'm sure we'll get into that later. You've then obviously got the 16 different lander or states who all have different politicians of different parties, of different political persuasions, who all have different views on how gambling, should be regulated. And then stakeholder-wise, as in just the industry stakeholders themselves, I think quite a few companies have been burned, you could say, from Germany, and some of the regulations have come into force since 2021 under the new treaty. Particularly regarding tax, I think, has been cited by a couple of different operators as impacting its revenue in the region. So I don't think anyone is entirely happy with it, no, certainly not. Okay,
and what about you, Ted? Have you seen any signs of anyone smiling and being positive about the future?
No. But simply no. I think everyone in Germany recognises that this is it. Well, look, the international operators say, full stop, it's unworkable. And you can't have this level of restriction in a market, and in a rich market such as Germany as itself, because the punters will move to the black market. The other thing is that it's coming from a transition that there was a German market prior to the Fourth Interstate. It was functional, and when it came in, and when it got revamped, it started to add a lot of restrictions on player deposits, as mentioned, on live gaming, and of course, your consumers are going to look for the better offer or the more modern offer offered by unlicensed operators. So it's an unworkable regime as it stands.
Okay, so if we maybe try to look a little bit to the future. When the GGL was established, what sort of mandate did that have?
Again, look, the GGL came as a guarantee from the Fourth Interstate that Germany needed or was required to have a federal body that would take complete oversight of gambling across German states. So that was its kind of mandate, right? And then the other thing, it was to kind of oversee the transition from kind of a placeholder element to a fully regulated German gambling regime for online services. And this is where you got this kind of mix mash of laws coming in, of states that have favoured heavy regulation and states that have been very kind of liberal on what should be done. The other thing about kind of German gambling is that it intertwines with existing laws. So again, they're going to have a big headache with what comes in terms of the advertising regime that will be applied to gambling, and how will the penalties be applied there, and how will who will take over the monitoring of German gambling advertising. When the GGL came in, stakeholders on the ground, the first thing they asked is, can we get a revision of the commercial restrictions, right? And the GGL were quite open to that. However, they haven't acted upon that since taking office, which is a big disappointment for the trade bodies.
Okay, so what have they actually been doing in the 6 months or so since they've been in charge of the regime?
One of the focuses we've seen from the GGL, and this was something they highlighted in the report that you talked about earlier, Martyn, the one that was published last week, along with a few other different updates from them. They've focused quite heavily on sort of countering illegal offerings, what they call what they believe to be illegal offerings under the new treaty. We've seen quite a few movements in this area. I mean, one that was quite public last year was they had I guess you could say, sort of a spat with Lottoland. We're accusing them of, I believe that if I can remember the quote, they said they accused Lottoland of offering illegal gambling in Germany for years. Lottoland then fired back against this with some of their own statements and some of their own legal action. So that's been one of the more sort of public things they've been involved in, as well as enforcing the requirements of the Fourth Interstate Treaty, and trying to keep operators compliant with that as companies adjust to these quite big changes. And we've seen some licenses either suspended or completely revoked. One of the two, I can't remember off the top of my head now. So yeah, from where I'm standing, that's been the more highly publicised activities of what they've been up to. I don't know if Ted has a different perspective on that.
Yeah, I think Ted Orme-Claye is right. They've been kind of managing the transition towards the Fourth Interstate, but in itself, it's just how hard that transition has been. Again, it's kind of pointing to these kind of damaging restrictions that they put in place that the states agreed on, and operators having to kind of handle that transition. On top of it, I'd also argue that the GGL, even in their remit of that they just haven't been kind of very open to change in how to apply these restrictions and whether they will actually whether they will implement a forthcoming review on the rules of the Fourth Interstate.
Okay, it's just a quick sort of follow-up to that, really. The people who are actually running the GGL, who are on the executive of the GGL, are they actually sort of have they come from the states? Are they familiar with gambling regulation? They understand it, or are they completely new to the industry?
That's a hard question. I mean, look, I can't tell you about every individual member. They've got 2 joint CEOs. Their mandate's very firm. I mean, look, they'll say they're handling a transition to a newly regulated market, and it's take it or leave it, right? These are the rules of play, and I think the GGL believes that they want a market that is going to be limited to a certain amount of players for German sports betting and German online casino, and it's up to the operators to get a grasp of the market and to make money to generate revenues out the market as best they can. The problem here is that hasn't come to fruition yet. So the operators themselves are arguing back, saying, "Look, these rules cannot be kind of commercialized. We cannot make any earnings in this market, right? Unless you give us a bit of leeway and we can we can provide a kind of a modern offering of online gambling to the consumer."
Okay, which brings us round to the great bogeyman of the regulated industry, the black market. How big a problem is that really for the German industry?
I mean, like any other regulated gambling market in Europe, I think obviously it's real and it is there. The GGL has taken, as I said earlier, has clearly taken this quite seriously. According to their latest report, they certainly have. I mean, I've got the figures in front of me. So they said they've checked over 2,000 different websites for illegal gambling or advertising of illegal products, and identified 207 different illegal operators in 2022. From what I remember from the report as well, they've differentiated those between more like general operators who offer a variety of betting and gaming offerings, and then more specialised ones. They might just be specialised legal poker site or something like that. So it's definitely a problem facing German gambling, and the GGL seems to be quite keen to tackle that problem.
I mean, look, on the black market, it's obvious why kind of an unlicensed operator would target an ineffective market such as the Fourth Interstate. As you mentioned, Germany is a populous country. Germany is a rich country. And any kind of loophole that they see, unlicensed gaming sites are going to say, yes, we can make money out of the German consumer. Its market is not working. There's a clear opportunity for them. And I think the frustration comes that the GGL is not willing to kind of revise its rules and say, look, we need to push our licensed market to be as competitive as the offering that they can get in the black market.
Sure. And, well, we know the GGL is taking the black market seriously. It's one of the things it's talked about is asking ISPs to actually ban customers from accessing those illegal operators completely. So we'll see how that pans out. But so moving forward a little bit now, what is on the GGL's agenda for the next few years in terms of reform? Are they giving serious consideration to what the operators are looking to do, or are they more focused on some of the issues we see in other countries around sort of strengthening safer gambling, managing the advertising regime, that kind of thing?
Okay, so the GGL's response to complaints is that, look, we're managing the transition. That's our first priority. Now, what is up on the agenda? There's, as mentioned, there's a reform of German advertising laws that has to be passed through the Bundestag and the Bundeslander have to agree on. That's going to be very tough. Again, that's the process of, can the German state agree on an advertising code for gambling? And the other thing is that the stakeholders or the businesses in the gambling businesses in Germany, they don't want this to play out. If you're on the ground, I doubt you want to have like a 5-year deliberation on how to apply an advertising law for German gambling. So again, there's so many kind of conflicts between the GGL and how the German laws can be applied. I think it's going to be another kind of slog for them. Yeah.
I don't really think I've got much to add other than what Ted says. It's looking just like some more murky waters ahead, I guess you could say, for them to navigate with regard to interacting with all these various different stakeholders. We've seen, as with like Belgium and the Netherlands, we've seen sort of advertising and player protection, as you referred to, Martyn, becoming a bit more of a talking point. And there's as I said, there's politicians at the federal level who are calling for some more restrictions to be brought in here. There's other politicians at the state level countering it. The German Trade Association, the Betting Trade Association, then obviously has its own counter argument to that. I think in terms of interacting with all these different stakeholders on these issues, the GGL has its work cut out.
Okay, so it sounds like a story that people in many European markets would be familiar with, but with the added complication of the German legislative setup between the federal and the state regimes there. So, is there any kind of consensus on the best way forward for the industry and for regulation in Germany then?
I'd say the resounding answer to that is no. Like we've said, there's just so many of these different stakeholders involved, all with various different opinions. Stakeholders in the betting industry, stakeholders in sports, both from the clubs themselves and from fan groups who've been calling for a betting advertising ban. You've got the politicians from different parties and different states. You've now got the GGL. There's far too many different stakeholders and people with different opinions for there to be sort of a single coherent, agreed upon viewpoint, in my opinion.
I think Ted raises a good point there because, look, when the GGL took charge of German gambling, I think a lot of stakeholders viewed that as in they would act as the regulatory authority, as the central point for policies and rulemaking for German gambling, and that simply hasn't happened. The other thing is that they haven't had a good consistency on how they've applied the laws of on German gambling, and I think that there's just been too many kind of infringements going on, and I think that's why so many people are disappointed.
Okay, so we've looked a lot at problems and problems that have happened already, problems moving forward. So with that in mind, why should the industry stakeholders continue to focus on Germany and continue to hope for a better future there?
It always comes down to numbers, and I think if you look at Germany, it's Europe's richest economy. It's Europe's biggest sports market. And I think the industry, it really does hinder itself if it doesn't have access, or it doesn't have a commercially vibrant market such as Germany. And the other thing is that kind of like tough regulations. I mean, Germany's highly influential, and you can kind of see, well, does that kind of high restrictions, does a regime does a restrictive regime, then is that going to then be applied to the likes of Switzerland, the likes of Austria, and neighbouring countries? So yes, I think that is why there's kind of so much attention to what is happening in Germany from a regulatory standpoint.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with Ted more on that one. I think he's hit the nail on the head exactly there. I mean, we've talked about this before, but there's been so many different regulatory changes going on throughout Europe at the moment, and I think any other country that might be considering new regulations could probably benefit from looking at the various ones that have already come into place in Germany, the Netherlands, Belgium, the UK, Ireland, where various other examples, and just sort of evaluate them and cross-examine them, and to get an idea of the best blueprint for success. And I think because as Ted's mentioned, because of the size of Germany, the influence of its economy, the prominence of its sports and betting markets, will be obviously and should be a very important market for any prospective regulatory reformers to consider.
I mean, I'd end it and say by saying that, look, if it comes to the end of the year and we're not seeing kind of any improvements, I think discussions will go towards what will be in the makeup of a fifth interstate treaty for German gambling, and whether that can be achieved in a reasonable kind of time frame that won't take another decade. But that's beyond my paycheck. Let me just put it there.
Okay, well, it's nice to know that there might not be any consensus in the German gambling industry, but consensus between you two on what the state of play in the country is. So thanks for joining us today, Ted and Ted. And I know you'll both be continuing to cover this on SBC News, and I'm sure the Casino Beats team will be considering continuing to cover this story as well. And so thank you very much for listening, and we'll be back with another edition of iGaming Daily tomorrow.
Thank you for listening to today's episode of iGaming Daily, brought to you in conjunction with SBC Summit Barcelona, being held at the Fira Barcelona Montjuic on the 19th to the 21st of September. If you want to find out more about some of the subjects raised today, feel free to explore any of the sites in the SBC News network, or check out the latest edition of the SBC Leaders magazine. Happy reading.